So let's say we're working with QuickBooks Desktop, and this specific QuickBooks Desktop file that I have, I'm going to go into the item list, and I'll show you that I don't have any items, no products and services. So I want to import a list of items, of inventory items from a spreadsheet. So let's say I got this spreadsheet that was sent to me by my vendor, the company that I purchased all my inventory from that I'm going to resell, and it just has 3 columns. It's got my SKU number, which in this case will just be the item name, a description, and then maybe a list price. And from this spreadsheet, we need to extrapolate a whole bunch of additional information so then we can import it into our QuickBooks Desktop. So I'm going to start the process of doing the import. However, we're going to run into some snafus across the way, and I'm kind of going to stop and interrupt and can explain what are all those things that we need to make sure we have on the spreadsheet for us to be able to do a clean import. So I'm going to go into QuickBooks Desktop here, and then I'm going to click on the File menu, and I'm going to go into Utilities, Import, and then Excel Files. Now keep in mind, this is called the Advanced Import, okay? This is one of the ways we can import items into QuickBooks. There's actually 4 options in total. We can use the Advanced Excel Import, which is the example that we're doing right now. We can use Add, Edit Multiple Items, which is an entirely different option, which we'll do a little bit later. Then we can do IIF. That's another option that we have to import an item list. And then we can also use a third-party tool like Transaction Pro Importer or Sassant. There's many of them, but those are the 2 that I've used in the past. Those are the 2 that I really like. So even though there's 4 ways to import items into QuickBooks Desktop, we're going to use this one way called Advanced Excel Import, okay? So we're going to click on Advanced Excel Import right there. We're going to click on that button, and then we're going to get this window pop up that says Import a File. You will notice that we have set up Import as one of the tabs and Preferences as the other tab. We'll talk about the preferences in a little bit. For now, we're going to leave it in Prompt Me, Let Me Decide, and Import Rows with Errors, and leave error fields blank. Those are the 2 default options, and we're going to leave those 2 default options as is. So we're going to go to Setup Import, and then we're going to choose this spreadsheet that we should have somewhere saved in our computer. So I'm going to click on Browse, and then I'm going to select my spreadsheet, and then click on Open. Once my spreadsheet is loaded up, I have to do mapping. So that's my next step here. I'm going to click right there where it says Mappings. So I'm going to click on Mappings. In here, I'm just going to click on Don't Show This Again, and then click on Yes. Okay, it says QuickBooks could not open CSV file. That's because I still have it open in Excel. So I got to make sure that I close it. I cannot have the file open while I'm attempting to do the import. So again, let's click on Mappings. And then under mapping name, I can create a new mapping name, right? So I can create a new mapping name. In this case, I'm going to leave this one here that's called items, but you can create your own mapping name. And then you tell it what is the import type. So it's going to be a customer import, a vendor import, an item import, and an account import. Those are the 4 types of files you can import through the Advanced Excel Import. I'm going to delete this one because that was a pre-configured mapping I already had, so we can kind of start from 0 here. And then I'm going to select here item, and then let me just go back for a second and add a new one. So I'm going to click on Add or Select Mapping, click on Add New, and then I'm going to call it Cisco Import, right? Because that's where I downloaded it from Cisco is my vendor. Then it says import type. So in this case, I'm going to select item, okay? And we have only 3 columns. I'm going to open up that spreadsheet again. We got 3 columns with information. Whoops. Let me open it. Let me close that and open that spreadsheet again. Give me 1 second. So we got 3 columns: SKU, description, and list price. Now I actually have some additional fields that I created on the spreadsheet, so I'm able to do an import, but for now I'm just going to be focused on SKU, description, and list price. I'll go back into QuickBooks here and start doing the import process again. And then I'm going to select for each of the QuickBooks fields, I'm going to select which of the fields in my Excel that I have. So I had 3 fields. I had SKU, which in this case would be item name. So I will click on the drop-down menu here and pick this option called SKU. And then I had description, which is going to be here where it says description or sales description. So I'll pick that description column. And then I had purchase description, which was also description, right? Because in this particular case, my vendors only give me one description. And in QuickBooks, you can have both a purchase description and a sales description that shows up in different with different information depending on the context. So if you're writing a purchase order, the purchase description would be different. If you're creating an invoice, then the sales description will have a different piece of information. And then we will have, let's say, list price, which in this case would be cost. And then we can select list price. So assuming that we only have those 3 columns, if I click on save and try to do the import, it won't let me do it. It's not a complete import. As a matter of fact, for me to use the advanced Excel import, there's a couple of required fields. Number 1, type is a required field. So I need to have a column for type, and that type needs to say either inventory part, non-inventory part, or service, right? So I need to specifically say the type of item that I'm importing into QuickBooks. Descriptions would not be required fields. So I am putting them, but they're not required. Income account, expense account, and asset account, those 3 are required fields. So I won't be able to import it unless I have all those 3 fields entered, because I am using inventory items, and we need to have all 3 of those fields: income, expense, and asset. All 3 of them are required fields. Then down here we have quantity on hand. That's not a required field, but if I want to import my beginning balances, I can do that. This tool actually allows me to do that. Preferred vendor, cost, tax agency, price, is inactive, reorder point, total value. None of these things are required fields. However, if I am importing a beginning balance, as of date would be a required field. So I want to get out of these import and open up the spreadsheet again. And then we're going to talk about those additional fields or those additional columns that need to be set up. So let me organize this spreadsheet again. And this is the same original spreadsheet with the 3 columns plus some additional columns I created, so I can kind of show you what the process looks like. I'm going to zoom this in so we can see a little bit better. Okay, so we have our SKU, which is our item name, our description, which is both our income, invoice, sales description, and our purchase expense description. We have our list price, which could have multiple meanings, so we'll talk about that in a second. Then we have a category, which is not a field that QuickBooks uses, but we could use a custom field for it. Then I have a column for quantity. So let's say I want to bring in all my beginning quantity on hand because it's a brand new item and I'm importing the item from scratch. QuickBooks will let me import beginning balances. Once the item is imported, once the item is created, I can no longer import beginning balances. But if I'm starting from scratch, and that is the case because I have no items in my QuickBooks, I can actually bring in my beginning balances. Then I have the column that says type, and I noticed that I typed there inventory part, and I put it throughout every single item. Then I have my income account, which in this case is sales, cost of goods sold account, cost of goods sold, asset account, inventory asset account, and then as of date, only required if I'm bringing beginning quantities. So in this case, I'm putting the date in which I want to import all those beginning balances. Again, the only thing that's required here is and I'll put them in bold. is going to be the item name. That's going to be a requirement. The type, that's going to be a requirement. And income account, cost of goods sold account, and asset account. These three here, I'll put them in yellow as well. These four here and the item name are technically the only ones that are required. Everything else is optional. So as long as I got all those covered, I'm good to go. Again, if I'm bringing quantity on hand, I also need to bring as of date. Now, in addition to that, if I'm bringing quantity on hand, I also have to have a cost. So right now we have this thing called list price, which could be cost, it could be sales price, it could be manufacturer's price. I really don't know. You might need to figure it out based on your circumstance what that list price means. Let's assume for a second that what that list price means, it means the manufacturer's suggested price. And me as a vendor, I pay 40% a discount from that. So I pay 60% of that price. So I'm going to create a new column. So I'm going to right click and click on insert, and I'm going to create my own column called cost. So basically I'm going to derive my cost, what I'm supposed to pay my vendor, from the list price. That didn't come from the spreadsheet. That's something I had to build afterwards because for whatever reason my spreadsheet didn't contain my cost. So I'm going to just do a simple formula, multiply the list price times 0.6, right? Because I'm getting a 40% discount on the list price. Just multiply times 0.6, press enter, and then I'm going to click and drag that down. So this is going to be my cost. This is what I will pay for this. And let's say the list price is now going to be the sales price. So I'm going to put here sales price. And in addition to that, I'm going to import this as the sales price and also in a custom field called list price. Just in case I go back and change my sales price in QuickBooks, I'm going to have my original list price in a custom field inside QuickBooks. So to be able to import custom fields, I have to go into QuickBooks. Let me hit cancel here. I'm going to go into creating a new item, and then I'm going to go into where it says custom fields. So in the custom fields, I have to now create a custom field called list price. So I'm going to click on define fields, and I'll just call it list price. Make sure I put the checkbox where it says use, making the custom field active, and then I'm going to click OK. And also I think I had another column called categories. Let's say I don't use categories in QuickBooks, so that would be an additional custom field as well. So let me go back into QuickBooks, go to define fields, and create one called category. It would be nice if QuickBooks did categories, but it doesn't. So we have to use a custom field for that. Perfect. So now that I have my two custom fields set up in my item list, I can now import, and I actually have all the components that I need in my spreadsheet to be able to import this. So let's go ahead and close the spreadsheet, and let's go into QuickBooks. We'll go to File, Utilities, Import Excel Files. Okay, same thing as we did before. We're going to click on Advanced Import. Okay, we're going to click on Browse so we can select the file that we want to import. So let's say I have this file here in my desktop. Select that, click on Open, and then I'm going to create the new mapping that we never got to complete right at the beginning because we had all these issues. So let's do Cisco import type. That's going to be item. So I need to select item as the import type. And now I'm going to do the mapping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select each of the columns inside my spreadsheet to match the QuickBooks columns. So type is going to be under type because that's the title that we give it. Name is going to be under SKU. Description is going to be under description. And I'm also going to use the same description on the purchase description. So I'll click on the drop down and also select description as well. Tax code and reimbursable charge, we're leaving that blank. Income account, we set up an income account. And then cost of goods sold account, we set that up here. And then asset account, we also set that up. So that was all part of the spreadsheet that we built prior to the import. Then the purchase description, so we're going to use the same field here as a regular sales description. On hand, we're going to pick the one called quantity. For cost, we had our own category for this, which we called cost. Perfect. And then we have price or sales price. We're going to use the column that we created for sales price, and we have as of date, which we created a column just for that. So now that we have everything mapped in here, oh wait, yeah, we forgot list price and category. Can't forget those. So that was, I think sales price, we were going to use this as a list price too. And we had a column also for category. So before you click save and before you import, you want to just double check and look at your spreadsheet to make sure that all the columns and other fields are where they're supposed to be. So then we're going to click on save, and that will save the mapping. So now the mapping is saved. If I ever have a spreadsheet in the future that look exactly like that, same column structure, just different data or maybe updated data, I can use the exact same mapping for importing that. Next step is we're going to click on preview. It's really important to get to the point where you get maybe some preliminary errors, and you kind of want to start troubleshooting these errors before you start importing. So it looks like there's an error in the file, and there's an error under cost, and it looks like our error is because we're using dollar signs. So that's what screwed us up. You actually cannot import it if there are dollar signs in there. So let me go back and open up that spreadsheet. And yeah, there it is. So our cost has dollar sign. So let me change this from dollar sign back to general, and then this from dollar sign back to general, and as of date. Okay, that one's good. Let me change this to short date, and there's no more dollar signs, right? Let's just make sure there are no more dollar signs. There's cost, list price, and where is, no, that's it. So we're good. So I'm going to click on save. Let me save this one. I'm going to save it with a different name just in case. Items 2. And let's go back and click on browse back in the advanced import. Let's select the other file, the items 2 that I created with a different formatting on the numbers. And let's go over the mappings. So that's correct. We can click on mapping. Oh, yeah, that was the issue. I have to close the Excel file. You can't have it open at the same time that you load it. So let's go over the mapping. Okay, everything is set up. Perfect. So no issues there. Let's click on save. And now let's click on preview. So that was the idea. Just kind of generate a couple of errors so you can see the issues that you could have along the way. So now it doesn't look like there's any errors along the way. So this will probably import fine. Notice that there's one really important option here, which is import rows with errors and leave error fields blank. So that's if there's an error, do you want to skip those? So in my opinion, I would do not import the rows with error, because that way if there's an error, my item doesn't get touched, it doesn't get imported halfway through or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And now that I've done my preview, that I checked my mapping, now I can click on import. Perfect. 217 records have been imported with 0 records. So now I got my entire item list here imported. If I double click on any of those items in there so I can see it, I have my cost, I have my sales price. Notice I have my quantity on hand. Okay, there's a little bit of an issue with my average cost. And let me see what happened here. So let me click on the edit. Yeah, so all my average cost is at 0 because I did a mistake when importing, which I didn't use the value column. So there was one more column I was supposed to fill in, which is the total value. So that was actually my error doing the import. Either way, maybe this is what you wanted. Maybe you want to import them at 0 average cost, which I don't think that's what most of the time we want if we're importing a beginning balance. So let me go back and pull up an inventory valuation report. That's going to show a 0. Yeah, that's true. That showed a 0. So that was an error that I caused on the import. That was my error by not having a value column. So let me go back. I can't undo this. It's already been imported. I cannot go back and fix my import. I would have to have had a backup prior to doing this import if I wanted to go back to that. So at this point, I can sit there and try to delete all my items. So I'm going to delete all my items, so it won't let me because I have to delete the beginning entries. I completely screwed this up by not entering the beginning value. So let me show you what would be the correct way to bring beginning balances with value doing the import. So let me open up that spreadsheet again, the one that we were working on just now. And then there should be one more column here called value. And then this column called value should contain a formula. Let me zoom this in so we can see a little bit better. So that contains a formula which is equals the total quantity on hand, in this case times our cost. So that was kind of the missing item here that I messed up, and I didn't have one for value. You must do that if you want to bring in the beginning value as well. So I'm going to bring that down, and then there's my value. Okay, so that was a missing formula to bring that in. So what I'll do is I'm going to add a couple characters to this. So let me add a 1 1 1 1 1 1. So I'm just going to do 4 of them so you can kind of see, and I'll delete the rest. So I'm going to do same exact process, but I want to make sure there's an additional column called value. So as long as I have an additional column called value, I'll be able to bring in the beginning balance value of the inventory, assuming, again, I'm importing beginning balances. If you were not importing beginning balances, this part wouldn't be important at all. So let's try that again. And let's go to File, Utilities, Import, Excel Files. Let's go to Advanced Import. Let's make sure we close this spreadsheet on Excel. Click on Browse. Select the file again. Okay, our mapping should be the same because we didn't change the structure of the sheet itself. I'll still click on Preview anyway. Perfect. So notice that all the extra ones that I created are there. So that's perfect. Click OK, and then click. Actually, I have to do one more thing. When I go into mapping, I have to now look for the total value mapping. Total value, and then do that value. I'm going to click on Save. Actually, I'm going to do one more thing. Okay, because this is actually a common mistake that I make too, which is forgetting to put the preferred vendor here. So I'm going to open up that spreadsheet. Okay, and then I'm going to add one more column called preferred vendor, and then I'm going to add the name of the vendor here. So Cisco. Let's say that's who I'm buying this from. So I'm adding an additional column for preferred vendor. So I'm going to go ahead and save that and close it. And also, before I do this import, I'm going to go back and I want to make sure that in my vendor center, my vendor Cisco is created. That way I don't get an error. So let me create my vendor Cisco. And normally you would have all their information, address, contact information, all that stuff. I'm just creating the vendor so it doesn't give me an error during the import. Okay, let's try that again. Let's go to Utilities, Import, and Excel Files, and go to Advanced Import, Browse, and click on Open. Go back into Mapping, and I need to go down to Preferred Vendor and add that additional column. So if you wanted to use any of these other things like tax code, reimbursable charge, deposit too, I hardly ever use those things. Tax agency, active, reorder point, that's useful sometimes. Then you have to make sure that that data point is in the spreadsheet somewhere. So let's go ahead and click on Save. Let's do a preview. Okay, no errors, good. And now let's click on Import. And let's see if now this import contains the beginning balances of those items that I just imported. So let's see. So these two that start with 1 1, double click on it. Notice that this one does have an average cost. So when I go into my inventory valuation report, so inventory valuation, notice that these 4 items here, the ones that have the 1 1s, the ones I added last minute, these do carry an asset value. So these imported with beginning balances correctly, the other ones incorrectly. Again, depending on what you were trying to achieve, you're trying to import them with beginning balances or without, that's going to be up to you. Remember that if you import something in beginning balances, I'm going to go into my balance sheet here real quick. Notice that there's an opening balance equity transaction created, right? QuickBooks needs to do a balancing entry. So every one of these inventory adjustments that carry a value, let me show you, it's going to post an actual individual inventory adjustment per item, all hitting the opening balance equity account. So you have to work with your accountant, or if you're yourself an accountant, you got to get that data, that number out of opening balance equity and put it in the correct place. Maybe it goes in retained earnings, If I'm doing something with, I'm reconstructing previous year's books, maybe it goes to cost of goods sold. If I'm making an adjustment to the current period, really depends on the situation. Now, finally, we'll talk about updating data. So what happens if I want to change a description or a price? I would use the same exact tool. So let me show you. I'm going to go down and open up the spreadsheet. Okay. And let's say, for example, for these 4 items, on these 4 items only, there's a change in sales price. So let's say the sales price for all these is going to go to 5,000. I'm basically doing that to make it just really obvious. And the cost goes to 2,500. Okay. And it's also changed the category to tools. Okay. So I'm basically changing a couple of fields in this spreadsheet so we can see how these fields update. Okay. And I'm going to clear out the descriptions for a minute just to kind of show you something that could happen if you actually import fields that have blank data. So I'm going to click on save, close that. Let's go back here. I'm going to go to File, Utilities, Import, Excel, back to Advanced Excel Import. Pick that file again. There it is. I'm going to go to the mapping, and since I'm no longer importing new items, I want to get rid of quantity on hand. So I'll no longer want to change quantity on hand. And I think it was the cost that we're changing and the sales price. So I can actually get rid of all the columns that I don't need. So notice I'm getting rid of all the columns that I don't need in this case. The income account, expense account, and asset account, I think it won't let you without that. Let's just try it just in case. Click on save. Oh, okay, it did let me. So good. So so I only had my, actually the type, I can get rid of that too because I'm just doing an update. So we just have name, cost, and sales price, right? So those are the only things that we're changing. And oh yeah, get rid of as of date. Let's get rid of category. Oh, we were changing the category, so let's leave those. So click on save. Oh, didn't let me go through. Oh, because I do have to have the type. That is a required field. So we'll click on save. Okay, so now let's click on preview. Perfect. So here's a quick preview of the stuff that's changing. So we got the item name, cost, list price, and category. Perfect. Now I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to come in here to mappings, and then I'm going to go into purchase description, and then I'm going to select description. So I'm going to bring in a blank field. Click on save, and then I'm going to go to import. Now notice what this says. It says the item already exists. What should I do? And notice you got a couple of options here. So we can keep the existing data and discard imported data. Basically what this says is if the item already exists, do you want to skip it or you want to replace the data under it? So we don't want to skip it because we're trying to do update. So in this case, I would do replace existing data, ignoring blank fields. If I select including blank fields, my purchase description is going to blank out. If I click on ignoring blank fields, it's going to leave my purchase description alone. So let's just see what that looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and click on apply all, click OK. And then I go back into the item. Notice my cost and my sales price has been updated. My descriptions have not been touched. I'm going to do the exact same import, the exact same way, exact same data, exact same update. So nothing will change. But when I click on import, I'm going to choose including blank field. So basically what I'm telling QuickBooks is if there's a blank field, I want you to remove whatever's already in QuickBooks and replace it with a blank. So you have to be very careful if that's what you want. Let me click on apply all and then click on back to the item. Notice that now my purchase description has been blanked out. So there's a lot of nuance between those questions, right? Ignore blank fields, leave blank fields. That's really important. So that's how you do the import with the advanced Excel. You can import new items. You can update items. You can do a lot of interesting things with it. Now let's talk about the Add Edit tool. So we're going to click on the list menu, Add Edit multiple list entries. And this tool works similarly, but just